In old age, you don't need friends, children, a husband or a wife. But these 5 things, let me talk to you the way I would if we were just sitting together somewhere quiet, maybe with a cup of coffee between us, no pressure, no performance, just honesty. Because when people think about old age, they often imagine loneliness as the biggest threat. They picture empty rooms, quiet phones, fewer invitations, and they assume that without a spouse, without children nearby, without a circle of friends, life must automatically feel empty. But the truth is a little different, and maybe even a little uncomfortable at first. I've seen people surrounded by family who still feel deeply alone, and I've seen others living quietly on their own who carry a kind of steady peace that doesn't depend on anyone showing up. So if we strip things down really honestly, there are a few things that matter far more than having people around. And once you understand them, old age stops feeling like something to fear and starts feeling a lot more manageable, even meaningful, in its own quiet way. The first thing, and this one is as practical as it gets, is having a body that still works well enough. Not perfect health, not the body you had at 20 or 30, but a body that allows you to move through your day without constantly asking for help. Being able to get out of bed without struggling, to walk to the kitchen to prepare your own meals, to step outside and feel the air without needing someone to guide you every time. These are small things when you're young, almost invisible, but in old age, they become the foundation of your freedom. A lot of people spend their younger years chasing money, status, recognition, thinking those are the things that will secure their future. But when you get older, you start to realize that your independence depends far more on your physical ability than on your achievements. If your legs are strong enough to carry you, if your hands can still manage simple tasks, if your body lets you handle your own daily life, then you still have control. And that control brings dignity. Without it, even simple decisions start to slip out of your hands. So the real advice here isn't complicated or dramatic. Take care of your body early and keep taking care of it in ways that are sustainable. You don't need extreme workouts or perfection. What matters is consistency. Walking regularly, keeping your joints moving, maintaining basic strength. These quiet habits build a kind of protection around your future self. And the truth is, when your body cooperates, even a simple day can feel satisfying because you're still participating in your own life instead of watching it happen from the sidelines. The second thing, just as real and just as necessary, is having a small but reliable income. Not wealth, not luxury, not a life filled with excess, but something steady, something you can count on, because financial stress doesn't disappear with age. In many ways, it becomes heavier. When you're younger, you can take risks, start over, push harder, but later in life, uncertainty hits differently. It's not just about money itself, it's about what money protects you from. It protects you from constant worry about food, about rent, about medical expenses, about whether you can handle the next unexpected problem that comes your way. I've seen people who don't have much, but because what they have is stable, they move through life with a kind of calm that others envy. And I've seen people who once had a lot, but without stability, they carry a quiet anxiety that never really leaves them. So this isn't about chasing more and more. It's about building something dependable, a pension, savings, Even a modest monthly income stream, these things matter because they remove a layer of fear. And when that fear is gone, your mind has space to rest, to think, to actually enjoy small moments instead of constantly calculating what might go wrong next. In old age, peace often comes not from abundance, but from predictability. Knowing that your basic needs are covered changes the entire tone of your days. It allows you to breathe a little deeper, to sit a little longer, to exist without that constant background noise of worry. Now the third thing begins quietly, and it doesn't seem as important at first, but over time it shapes everything, having a simple daily routine. Not a rigid schedule that turns life into a checklist, but a gentle structure that gives your day a sense of direction. When people retire or step away from their earlier responsibilities, they often imagine freedom as having no schedule at all, waking up whenever they want, doing whatever they feel like. And for a short time that can feel relaxing, but after a while something shifts. Without structure, days begin to blur together. Morning feels like afternoon. Afternoon drifts into evening, and before you know it, time starts to lose its shape. And when time loses its shape, the mind follows. You begin to feel a little disoriented, a little ungrounded, even if you can't quite explain why. That's why routine matters, not because it restricts you, but because it anchors you. Something as simple as waking up at a consistent time, having a morning habit, stepping outside for a walk, preparing a meal at a certain hour. These small patterns create rhythm. And rhythm, more than excitement or novelty, is what keeps the mind steady over long stretches of time. What's interesting is that routine doesn't need to be impressive to be effective. It doesn't need to look productive from the outside. It just needs to be yours. Maybe it's a quiet morning with tea followed by a short walk. Maybe it's tending to a small task, reading for a while, resting in the afternoon. These aren't grand achievements, but they give your day a beginning, a middle, and an end. They prevent that feeling of drifting, which can slowly wear down your sense of purpose. And in old age, purpose doesn't always come from big goals anymore. It comes from continuity, from showing up for your own life in small, consistent ways. And the subtle thing about routine is that it doesn't just organize your time, it stabilizes your emotions. When your day has a rhythm, your mind knows what to expect. There's less chaos, less uncertainty, fewer moments where you feel lost in your own hours. Even on difficult days, the routine carries you a little, like a quiet support system you've built for yourself. And over time, that support becomes incredibly valuable, especially when external structures fall away and you're left with more space than you once had. That space can either feel peaceful or overwhelming, and often the difference comes down to whether there's something steady holding your day together. So as we move forward, you start to see how these pieces connect. A body that still works gives you the ability to act. A stable income removes constant pressure, and a simple routine gives your days shape and direction. Together they create a kind of foundation that doesn't depend on other people being present all the time. And once that foundation is there, something else begins to grow on top of it, something quieter, but just as important, something that gives your days not just structure, but a reason to keep going, even when life becomes very still. Because structure alone, as helpful as it is, can only carry you so far. At some point, even a well-shaped day needs something inside it that pulls you forward. Something that gives a quiet sense that today is worth stepping into. And that's where the third thing continues to unfold, because having a routine is one part of the equation. But what really sustains a person over time is having at least one reason to get out of bed each morning. Not a grand purpose, not something the world applauds, not a mission that needs to impress anyone, but something small, personal, and consistent. It might be a habit, a responsibility, or even something as simple as a moment you look forward to. What matters is not how big it is, but that it exists. You see, a lot of people think loneliness is what breaks someone in old age, but more often, it's the absence of anticipation. It's waking up and feeling like nothing is waiting for you. Nothing needs you. Nothing is pulling you into the day. That kind of emptiness doesn't always show up dramatically. It creeps in slowly, in quiet mornings that feel a little heavier than they should, in afternoons that stretch too long, in evenings that arrive without anything memorable attached to them, and over time that lack of forward movement starts to drain your energy. So the real shift here is learning to create your own reason instead of waiting for one to appear. Sometimes that reason is incredibly simple. It could be taking care of something like watering plants, feeding a pet, or maintaining a small space that depends on you. It could be going to the same place each day, not because you have to, but because it gives your day a point of contact with the outside world. It could even be something as quiet as following a story, reading a book, watching a series, or working through a personal interest that unfolds gradually over time. These things might seem small when you compare them to the goals people chase earlier in life, but in old age, they serve a very different function. They create continuity. They give your day a thread that connects one moment to the next. And the important thing is that this reason doesn't have to justify itself to anyone else. It doesn't need to be productive, profitable, or impressive. It only needs to matter to you. Because when you have even one thing that gently calls you into the day, getting up feels less like an obligation and more like a quiet agreement with yourself. And over time, that agreement builds resilience. It keeps your mind engaged, your attention focused, and your sense of time intact. Without it, even the best routine can start to feel empty, like going through motions without any real direction. But with it, even a simple day can feel complete. Now, as we move further, there's another layer that becomes more and more important, especially when life naturally becomes quieter. And that is the fourth thing, deep connection, but in a very different sense than most people imagine, because by the time you reach old age, your social world often changes whether you want it to or not. People move away, relationships fade, some are lost entirely, and the wide circle you once had tends to shrink. And if you measure your life by how many people are around you, that shrinking can feel like loss. But if you look more closely, something else is happening at the same time. What remains often becomes more real. You don't need a large number of relationships to feel connected. What you need is truth in the connections you still have, even if that number is very small. One person you can speak honestly with, one relationship where you don't have to perform, where silence is comfortable, where you are seen as you are, that carries far more weight than a room full of shallow interactions. And sometimes that connection isn't even constant. It doesn't need to be daily or frequent. What matters is that when it happens, it feels genuine. And here's something people don't always say out loud. Even if you don't have many people, or even if your life becomes mostly solitary, connection doesn't disappear entirely. It changes form. It can exist in brief conversations, in familiar places, in small interactions that remind you that you're still part of the world. It can also exist in how you relate to yourself, in the way you speak to your own thoughts, in whether you treat your own presence as something valuable or something to escape from. Because in the end, the longest relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. And if that relationship is tense, critical, or restless, then no amount of external company will fully compensate for it. So the shift here is subtle but powerful. Instead of chasing quantity, you begin to value depth. Instead of needing constant interaction, you begin to appreciate moments that feel real. And when you approach connection this way, you're no longer dependent on having a large social circle to feel grounded. You become less afraid of quiet spaces because you know that connection in its truest form doesn't require constant noise. And this brings us naturally and quietly to the fifth thing, which sits underneath everything else and determines how all the other pieces feel in your daily life. It's the ability to be at peace alone, not just to tolerate solitude, not just to distract yourself from it, but to actually sit in it without discomfort taking over. Because no matter how your life is structured, no matter how many people are around or not around, there will be moments and often long stretches where it's just you and your own mind. And in those moments, everything becomes very clear. If your mind is restless, if it constantly searches for distraction, if it turns toward regret, anxiety, or dissatisfaction, the moment things get quiet, then solitude can feel heavy, even suffocating. But if your mind has learned over time to settle, to observe without reacting to everything, to let thoughts pass without clinging to them, then something changes. Silence becomes restful instead of empty. Time slows down in a way that feels spacious instead of endless, and you begin to experience a kind of ease that doesn't depend on anything external. This doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't come from forcing yourself to be positive or pretending everything is fine. It comes from gradually becoming familiar with your own inner world, from not running away from your thoughts every time they appear, from allowing yourself to sit with discomfort until it softens. And over time, that practice builds a kind of inner stability that carries you through situations where external support may not always be available. When you have that, something important shifts. You stop needing constant distraction. You stop depending on others to fill every quiet moment. You begin to feel at home in your own presence, and that changes the entire experience of aging. Because instead of measuring your life by what's missing, you start to recognize what's already here in the simplest moments, in the quietest spaces. So when you put all of this together, you start to see a different picture of old age. Not one defined by who is or isn't around you, but one shaped by what you've built within and around your own daily life. A body that still allows you to move, even if not perfectly, a small, steady source of income that removes constant worry, a simple routine that gives your days structure. One reason, however small, that draws you forward each morning. And finally, a mind that can sit in its own company without turning that silence into suffering. With these in place, life doesn't need to be loud or crowded to feel complete. It becomes quieter, yes, but also clearer, steadier, and in many ways more honest. And if you can reach that point, then old age is no longer something you endure. It becomes something you understand, something you live through with a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. And if you've stayed with me until this point, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen and reflect on this with me. I hope somewhere in all of this, you found something that feels useful, something you can carry with you in your own way. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.